Today is the 24th Sunday of the year. Our gospel text is taken from Mark chapter 8, verses 25 through 37. It's the account of the revelation of the Messiah in the region of Caesarea Philippi. Before we address the text as such, let me ask you a question. Has life turned out for you as you expected? I suggest for all of us, if I can be so daring as to say this, for all of us, life has surprises. Sometimes what we expected doesn't happen. Sometimes what we expected does happen, more or less. But this death of expectations is part and parcel of growing up. I'd like to reflect on the theme of awakening. The awakening to the way things are, rather than the way I think things should be, or the way I presume they will be. Waking up is a lifetime's work. And waking up is at the core of becoming who and what we are, God's creation. There is a delightful story that is told just before this account in Matthew chapter 8. At the northern edge of the Sea of Galilee, there is a town called Bethsaida. Jesus heals the blind man. And according to Mark's account, they bring the blind man to Jesus. He takes him by the hand. He leads him out of the village. He puts saliva on his fingers and touches the man's eyes and asks the man, "Can you see?" The man says, "I can see people. They're like trees walking." Jesus touches him again, and eventually the man sees. I think this offers us a key to the awakening, the seeing that comes upon the disciples a little bit further north of Bethsaida, in the region of Caesarea Philippi, about 40 k's north of Bethsaida, in fact. It's largely Gentile territory. Isn't it interesting that the Messiahship is revealed in Gentile territory? We're reminded constantly at the beginning of Mark's Gospel that a whole lot of outsiders recognize Jesus for who he is before the disciples or any of the religious authorities recognize it. Even the demons recognize it. Remember the story of the woman with the hemorrhage? She's unclean. She's a woman after all. Her witness is not valued. She recognizes him. The Syrophoenician woman, modern day Lebanon, that territory. This is a Lebanese woman. She recognizes him. She's not a Jew. Jesus tries to fob her off, actually, and she calls him to book. And the narrator, Mark, of course, starts off in verse 1 of chapter 1, recognizing that it is the story of the Messiah. And at the baptism, Jesus is announced by God, "This is my beloved Son." Now, in this instance described by Mark today in the Gospel, in the region of the villages of Caesarea Philippi, Jesus does something interesting, something a rabbi wouldn't normally do. The teacher waits for the questions. Jesus gets on the front foot and asks the questions. Who do the people say I am? And then, who do you say I am? The metaphor in the blind man's healing, where Jesus took the blind man by the hand and led him out of the village, I think suits this moment. By questioning, it is as if Jesus takes the disciples by the hand and leads them out of the village of their taken-for-granted world. Their expectations, their sense of who, what the Messiah should be, is slowly being dismantled and replaced by the real thing. It is a moment of awakening. Now, it's not the first awakening, actually. Earlier on, we are told of a conversation the disciples have with Jesus. In chapter 4, they say, "Why do you teach the people in parables?" And Jesus says a strange thing, actually. Well, they won't understand, but you will. To you is given the secret of the kingdom of God. I think it's fair to observe here that although the disciples at that point were given the secret, they didn't understand what they were given. They weren't awake to the truth. They are to awaken as time goes by. And in this passage in the region of Caesarea Philippi, there is an awakening. The disciples are slowly becoming more deeply who and what God is calling them to be. There's a lot of unmaking. There's a lot of purification. There's a lot of blindness to be dealt with. But it's happening. There's an inner journey here. This is the real journey of life. This is how these disciples will become whom God calls them to be. So that metaphoric description of the healing of the blind man applies to us all, I suggest. We can live in villages, routines, habits, selfishness. Fear can be like analgesics that have us sleepwalking through life, embedded as we are in our taken-for-granted world, refusing to leave the village, to address the questions that life is constantly asking of us. Who do you say Jesus is? Who is he in your life? What difference does he make? It is these questionings, these moments where Jesus is offering his hand to lead us from the village so that we can see, so that we wake up. This is life. This is what it means to live.